So I'm going to tell you a story about a girl who lives and then dies, but that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is everything that happens in between, about how this little girl goes from living in this beautiful, picturesque Italian village.
Something like this. Somewhere like this.
To killing 600 men, about how she is eventually burnt or hung for it, about how she orphans herself, about how she does all of this in the name of medicine, how she does this because she believes that she is a savior, a helper of women. You see, half the country would call her a savior, they would call her mother, helper, guardian. The other half would say she was a sadistic murderess. But before all of this, she was just a little girl who lived in a village. You see, she had a mother and a father. Her father was a drunk, her mother was an angel. She was just a little girl. And how does she become who she will become? Well, it starts decades before she will eventually be burned at the stake for her crimes. It started in her mother's apothecary shop, where she learned that you could heal people, that you could help people. Hi, I'm Eliel. I'm the storytelling alien. I'm so glad you stumbled upon my corner of the internet, but above all things, I'm happy that you exist. So, what do? I tell true, factual stories that can't be verified, that are very accurate, well, except for the parts that are, well, not. Welcome to History How It Ought to Be. I tell really cool, fun stories about, I don't know, people I think are cool. That's what I do. Her name is Giulia Tofana. Her story is interesting. What makes little girls turn into monsters or heroes, depending on who you ask, I suppose. Do you know what burning flesh smells like? Do you know what the sound of hearing someone's bones turn into ash? Juliana would tell you it feels like death. She would tell you it feels like the only person that ever loved her disappearing. You see, Juliana stands in front of her mother's burning corpse. Juliana orphaned herself. I'm not cruel for saying this, it is true, it is a fact. Giulia understands this, that she is the reason she has no parents. At least, she believes this deep down in her heart. You see, Juliana lives in a village.
You see all of that? Look at the place that Julia probably would have grown up in.
This village is like gorgeous. I mean, it's in the Italian countryside. Like, in your mind, when you imagine a perfect Italian village, this is Giulia's home. The markets are rustic but beautiful. They're filled with life. There is goods of all sorts being sold, and around it are homes, little townhouses and flats with people living inside of them. They are beautiful vineyards that just everywhere, as far as the eye can see. There is a beautiful villa in the corner of this gorgeous village. It is owned by the most wealthiest family in the entire village. You see, Giulia lives in this tiny house, but it's warm somehow. Her mother made sure it felt warm all the time. The home was not perfect, it was falling apart, but it was still somehow beautiful to Giulia.
That would have been Julia's house. It would have been beautiful and perfect. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was picturesque. I mean, it was small, it wasn't the best, but it was pretty nice, I'd say. She was a happy child. She just didn't have the best life because of her dad, but she was still so happy, you know?
Giulia every day would spend her days at the apothecary shop. You see, her mother healed people. Her mother was like insane in these skills. I mean, okay, so first things first, her mother was magic. If you brought your sick, dying child to her, to Juliana's mom, her mom's name was Maria. Maria was her name, and the whole village knew about her. She wasn't very liked by half the village. You see, they thought she was a witch. And this is why. They thought she was a witch because she could heal people. You would come to her with your ailments, with your sickness, with your pale face, having no life in it, and she would give you a vial, a bottle, a powder, a concoction of some kind, and then you would be better. You see, she healed people. People would come to her with broken bones, and she would stitch them back up like she was fixing clothing. Juliana's mother was a healer. You see, everyone called her Maria, but to Giulia, she was just mother, helper, savior. So, Juliana would sit in her mother's apothecary shop and learn about the different plants, about the ferns and the leaves that came from the oak trees, about barks of different kind of leaves, about how blood mixed with these medicines, about how berries could cure ailments. She learned about all of them. I mean, her mother didn't spare a single detail, and there were a lot of details, but her mother knew all of them. You see, next to this Italian village there was a huge, beautiful forest that was scary. The people thought it was scary, but Giulia and her mother would go through it, walk, and would learn about how if you collected lime from stones and mixed it with certain berries, that you could create healing for people. You know, her mother would teach her how to root down for good roots the best parts of plants, because people deserved the best. Juliana's mom would tell her that we heal people, that I heal people. And then in that moment, as a little child, Giulia decided she wanted to be just like her mother Maria, that she wanted to help people, save people. You see, the town priest thought that Giulia's mother was a witch. He would shout in the streets at church time saying women shouldn't do these things, that they belong in the home. You see, that they belong to be seen and unheard, and that it was unnatural, that you shouldn't go somewhere to be healed, that you should let prayers heal you, that you should let God heal you. And some people believed him, but most of the village thought he was talking nonsense because they loved her. So that family, Giulia's family, did have like a love-hate relationship with the village, because half the village considered her to be truly so helpful, and the other half thought her to be some kind of witch. But nevertheless, Giulia spent her early childhood in that shop, from the time she was a baby. In that shop, learning, helping, seeing people come in with their crying family members and leaving happy. Of course, they couldn't always save people, but they tried. They always tried to save people. Now we move on to Lucia, the friend. Lucia was a part of the wealthiest family in the whole entire village. I mean, remember the villa I talked about in the beginning, that magnificent villa on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by beautiful vineyards? That was her family's vineyards.
What I'm trying to tell you is that Lucia's home was quite grand. Had stairs, it was 3 stories tall. I mean, it was a beautiful villa that anyone would envy. Lucia's house was quite grand, like this one. Beautiful. Something quite marvelous. Even though Lucia lived in such a big house, she was very humble and very kind.
She was rich. Maybe not the richest in the country, but the richest in this village. And she became best friends with Giulia. How did she become best friends with Giulia? Lucia had a baby brother. His name was Marco. He was the sweetest baby boy. He was a gift to this family. You see, Lucia's mother wasn't very good at holding pregnancies. It was devastating for this family. It was devastating towards Lucia's mother. Lucia's mother went by the name Linda. That wasn't her full name, but that is what the people of the village called her. Lucia's mother was heartbroken, bereaved for every child that she had lost. But she would not stop trying. The doctors told her to stop, that she couldn't, that she wouldn't, and then it happened. Lucia's brother Marco was born. Oh, did they not throw the biggest feast, the biggest party in the name of this boy? You would think that Lucia was a bit jealous of her baby brother because everyone loved him so, but they were not. They were glad that he existed. She was glad because it got lonely on this vineyard, in this villa. Yes, she had servants and her mom, father, but she didn't have someone that was her own, and her brother became her own. And then at the age of 3, he got sick. He got poisonously sick. He started to fade. He had seizures after seizure. He was not okay. He never felt well, and every doctor came in from near and from far, and they could not figure out why. They gave him treatments, medicine, and he was not being healed. They told the family to prepare for the boy's death, that there was nothing that could be done for this boy, that his end was inevitable. But Linda, Lucia's mother, would not listen. She could not believe that she had suffered so to give birth to her perfect baby boy, for him to be ripped out of her arms. She went down to the town square, right in the center, and walked into the apothecary shop with tears in her eyes. She looked at Maria, the healer, the owner of this apothecary, and she said, "Could you come and save my son? They say that there is no hope for my baby boy, but please come save my son." Maria's mother said she would try her best, that she would work her hardest. They all of them walked up to the beautiful villa, and they went up these stairs, these grand stairs, in this grand home that was made of the finest stone, with curtains that were made of the finest, most beautiful, delicate material. And they walked to the end of this hallway that was dark. It had no sun. You see, some of the doctors said that sun was bad for the boy, so they kept him in darkness. First thing that Giulia's mother did was open every curtain. She says, no one can live like this. He must feel light. He must feel warmth. He must feel loved. And she looked at the little boy in his bed, had said, it's okay, don't be afraid. And she examined him, and she turned him around, and she looked at his arms and feet, legs, and she said that she's seen this before, that it happens in little boys sometimes, and she thinks that she knows how to fix it. I couldn't tell you exactly what she did. You see, this is the part where even I believe that she might have been magic. But she opened up her bag of potions and concoctions and berries and herbs, and she began to mix and turn and toil. And then she came up and gave the boy the strength and these herbs. And she opened up every window in that room, and every day for 7 days, 2 times a day, she would come up and feed the boy this medicine that she had created. And on the 8th day, in the almost biblical kind of way, this boy rose up from his bed and was healed. The dead boy, he was basically dead. He lived. And Lucia and her mother Linda could not understand. And during this time of great sadness, Giulia would comfort her friend Lucia. She would come down to the house and comfort her friend, her new friend that she made, and said, "We will try our best to help your baby brother." And they would play in the castle. And in this way, Giulia would not feel alone, and Lucia would not feel alone. During this time when Giulia's mother was coming up to the house to help Marco, the baby boy of this family, Giulia and Lucia became great friends. They were very lonely little girls, I think, in their own ways. Lucia lived in this grand house, and she just had her governess who would teach her how to be quite proper, how to walk, talk, dance, read, play instruments. She had her mother and father, but they were mostly focused on her baby brother. And before that, they didn't really pay all that much attention to her. Then she had servants, and her house was full, but it felt empty. She was lonely in a house filled with people, and then she got her baby brother, and then she wasn't so alone anymore. And now we have Giulia, who would spend her days in her mother's apothecary shop. Before she could remember, she had her father, but her father was an incredibly cruel, violent man who would take the light out of her mother's eyes. You see, her mother was a happy, joyful woman, but behind her eyes there was a type of darkness. Her father was incredibly abusive. He would spend all their money at brothels. He would not work at all. He would steal all of their money. He was incredibly jealous of Giulia's mother, but he wouldn't say this. He was a violent man. He would mostly beat Giulia's mother, and Giulia would sometimes try to defend her mother. She wanted to defend her mother, but she was a little girl who was 4 times smaller than him, probably. She was tiny, and her father was this massive monster. But she was scared of him, but not in the same way you are scared of gigantic monsters. She knew that this man was weak, that this type of violence was not strength, but she did not yet know how to overcome it. And now she would go down up to the villa. She would go up to the villa where her mother would be taking care of baby Marco, and her and Lucia would just run around the vineyards. She would try to make Lucia feel better. She would tell her that my mother is the best, the best there is, and if somebody can help your baby brother, it is my mother. She's like magic. I know that is a bad thing to say, but she is so helpful. My mother, I saw her, this boy came in with an arm that was broken right down the middle, snapped in two. The doctors told him that he would be a cripple for the rest of his life, and my mother put his arms back together. She put it together as if you put back broken wood pieces together, and she wrapped his arm, and she would go over to the boy's house every single day and wash his wounds and look at the arm, and then the boy's arm healed straight. It healed perfectly straight. My mom is like magic. She's so wonderful, and we will really like to help your baby brother. And then Lucia would tell Giulia that she is so happy that she found her, and that they should be friends forever, that they are like sisters now, that they will never leave each other's side. You see, they also didn't have many friends. Lucia's parents were very protective over her in a way, her being the only living child they've ever had, and Giulia was alone in the village. Other kids didn't really play with her. She was often bullied because the priest would think that her mother was not supposed to be working, and some of the kids would tease her because of that. They would ask her if she is not weird, if her family is not, why does her family behave in this way that is not very normal to them. So she would be bullied for it a lot, and the other kids would be unkind to her, and they would pull her hair. She had beautiful brown hair that would like reach her waist, and it had so much life in it. She was filled with so much life. So she would just avoid the kids, mostly the town bullies who would push her and shove her and call her names and call her mother names, which above all things she did not appreciate. She adored her mother, so she did not like the town's kids. So Lucia became the first friend her own age that Giulia had made ever in her whole entire life. After the 7 days were up, the boy was healed. Marco walked on the 8th day. He played, he ran, he lived. Not to give you a spoiler, but the boy lived for another 68 years. A boy every single doctor said would drop dead lived. And Lucia was so glad, so happy to see her brother thriving and healing and walking. And now, every other day, or was it every day, Giulia would come up to Lucia's house and they would run throughout the castle. Giulia loved being in Lucia's house. They had a library that was magnificently beautiful. It had books upon books upon books, and she found entire sections of the library that were just dedicated to plant life. And she lost her entire mind when Lucia told her that if she wanted, that they could order books from either Sicily or Rome, and that these places that had bigger cities, that had bigger library books, that they had knowledge that we haven't even heard of yet. And Lucia didn't really like reading all that much, but she saw how much her friend enjoyed reading these books on plants and herbs, so she would beg her father to order more books for her, and she would just let Giulia read all of them. They would spend their time in the library. Well, Giulia would read all her books, learning about new plants that she didn't even know existed. You see, her village was small. It was large but small, so she didn't have much to work with, and she would read in these books about other plants, and she would bring it to her mother, and they would create new concoctions together, new potions and remedies together. And in this library, well, Lucia would paint and sew, and Giulia would read. They would laugh together. They would go in the vineyard and run around. They would have picnics by the lakeside. they became inseparable. And then this would be one of Giulia's most fondest memories. We remember a time where her mother would work at the apothecary shop and Lucia would be waiting for her in the vineyard for picnics, and she would walk through the forest picking berries. It was beautiful, but somehow deep down in her heart she knew this type of peace could not last forever. Giulia had, I already told you, her father was quite like violent. He was a very violent, yelly man, and Giulia one day hoped that she would be able to take her mother away from this place where she could be safe and feel at home. You know, Giulia wanted to take her mother away to a better place, you know? And at the end of the day, she didn't know how she was going to do it, but she knew that she was going to save her mother. Giulia and Lucia would sit by the vineyard. There was this beautiful river that ran through the vineyard. I mean, this river was made of crystal blue water. It was beautiful. The girls would sometimes swim in the river and have picnics by it. And on this day, like many times before, Giovanni came. Giovanni was the son of the priest. Giovanni was a bully.
So remember, Giovanni is like a character, and he's a bully. Giovanni is a bully. He's a massive bully that tortures Lucia and Giulia to no end. And his father is a priest. His father's a priest in this little Italian village that looks like it's something out of like a novel. And here it is. Here is like the church. And it's beautiful if his father wasn't I can't say, can I? If his father wasn't such an awful person, but the church is something like, I get why people would go here all the time to pray. It is quite beautiful, isn't it? Yeah. Look at the church. Wouldn't you come here to pray? But Giovanni's father, the priest, was a bad man. You see, he didn't believe that Giuliana's mom was a good person. He thought she was like a witch or something. So the church was beautiful, but it was rotten from the inside. You know? Very rotten.
He was much bigger than the girls, and he wouldn't touch Lucia, but he would shove Giulia all the time. He would pull on her hair, and he would steal their food. He would say, "Thank you for the food, it's what you're supposed to do. My father says the woman should cook, unlike your weird mother." Giulia would scream, "My mother's not weird, my mother is good, my mother heals people." Giovanni would smirk and say, "Your mother is a witch who should probably be burnt." Giulia was so upset at this, but this boy towered over her. She felt so helpless and weak. And every once in a while, these boys would come and do this, and it was becoming more often. And Lucia would tell Giulia to ignore it, that they had more food at home, that it did not matter. But Giulia did not understand this. She said that this is ours, that we bake this, that we make this food, and they can not just come and rip it from us. These three bullies just come every single time and ruin our days. No, I'm gonna stop this. I'm gonna stop them. Lucia said, "And how are you gonna do that? Really? Just they'll stop one day. Just leave them." And Giulia said, "No, these people don't just get to walk around and tell us what to do and push us around. People like my dad or the priest or Giovanni, all of them, they bully us. They make life so miserable for us. We need to stop them. I'm going to stop them." And this idea popped into her head. She got an idea. She wasn't going to use it before, but now she thinks that she should. You see, Giulia would spend a lot of her days in the forest all by herself with animals, and she would walk around and she would find birds that needed help. She would fix their broken wings, or she would find baby birds that had fallen out of their nests and she would nurse them back to health. She had a whole entire corner in the forest where she had baby birds and bunnies and rabbits and tortoises that she would just help. That she would find them and she would give them medicine and food. She felt like it was practice for when she would heal people just like her mother. But as she was in the forest, she would mix different berries together that her mother would not normally mix. Different herbs and barks, because she was curious on what they did, especially with all the new books she was getting from the bigger cities. She thought to herself, what other potions and remedies could I make? Perhaps I could make something that would heal more people. And one day she mixed a red berry with the slime that was found at the bottom of a ravine with bark and some other powders from her mother's apothecary shop, and she would mix them, and she found a rabbit that was quite sick, and she understood that in her mind that if these separate things would make you feel better, then together they would make you feel even better. You know, that is what is going through her childlike mind. And she found a sick bunny who was he looked like he had a fever, and she thought that this must help him, because she had tried everything to save this bunny and nothing was working. So she gave the bunny her new concoction that she made, that she genuinely believed would help the bunny, and the bunny began to seize. It began to its legs began to move quite like frantically in pain. Its eyes began to bleed red. Its nostrils began to bleed red. It was like trying to scream, almost whining in pain. She had never, and this caused Giulia deep distress, because she had never seen one of her potions or remedies do something so violent to an animal. And she sat there and cried, because she thought all plants made people better. She thought every plant was meant for healing. But in that moment, as this bunny died in her arms, she realized that not all plants and powders make people better, that some make people incredibly sick, ill, even to the point of death. And now we go back to when she was looking at Lucia and thinking, how is she gonna help her Giovanni problem? How was she gonna get these bullies to stop making her life a living hell? She thought to herself that maybe all medicine does help people. Maybe all herbs and plants do help people. Some cure fevers and ailments, others cure wounds and infections. But what if other plants, herbs, were meant to heal the world, but in a different way? Heal the world of the affliction that is some people. You see, in that moment, Giulia realized that maybe this is how she could get rid of one of her problems. She knew that perhaps she could make sure that these boys never did this again. That she would never be the biggest or the strongest or the richest. No, those positions were held by all the evil, cruel men in the world, like her father and the priest. no, she knew that perhaps this was the way she would heal the world. So Juliana looked at Lucia and said, next time I'm bringing all the picnic food. Don't bring a single thing. Don't bring a single thing. Don't touch the food. I'm doing everything. I'm so excited. Those boys are they're gonna stop making our lives a living hell, Lucia. I promise you. I figured it out. Lucia said in excitement. She ran home and she opened up all the cupboards, all the cabinets. She ran down to the apothecary shop and grabbed specific things, different colors. One was green, I think the other was blue, I'm not sure, I don't work in apothecary. But she grabbed all these different things and she ran down to the forest, went to a specific tree that was so tall and was turning orange in a way, and she cut a piece of bark from it, and she brought everything that she had collected and began mixing it, and then she had what she needed, and she made a pie, the best pie she had ever made in her whole entire life. If you asked her at that moment, she made a pie and cakes. She didn't want to hurt the boys, she just wanted to teach them a lesson that stealing is wrong, that taking is wrong, that being cruel is unkind. So she made a pie, and she made some scones, a couple of muffins, she made biscuits, she made a beautiful pasta, the best food she thinks she has ever made. And 3 days from the day that the idea originally popped into her mind, her and Lucia were scheduled for another picnic. She brought this stuff up to their picnic place by the river, and she knew the boys would come. They saw her walking up the hill and they knew that was their sign. And then Lucia was about to open the basket to begin their picnic tradition, and Lucia was so excited. She's like, this looks amazing. Oh my god, Giulia, this is insane. You're such a good cook. And then Giulia was like, don't eat it, it's not yours, it's for Giovanni and his friends. I made it especially for them. I think you were right, Lucy. I think sometimes you just need to ignore it. Maybe if we are a bit kinder, they will be kinder to us. And Lucia smiled. I knew you would get it. But let's just pretend we're gonna eat it, because otherwise I don't think they will, take it. We just have to be a bit nicer, So Lucia and Giulia set up their beautiful picnic, and right on schedule, the boys come up the hill and say, so look what we have here. Oh, is that a pie? Giovanni says, oh, that looks nice, give that to me. Giulia says, no, you must ask nicely. He says, I will ask however I wish to ask. Who are you to tell me what to do? He was not having. He grabbed the pie and took a big bite out of it and said, you know what? If you just did this all the time, perhaps God wouldn't hate you when you're a mother. Giulia bit her tongue and just smiled through the pain and said, maybe. And the rest of the boys began eating and taking all the food they had. They left basically nothing. And they said, thanks girls, same time next week. Lucia was very upset with the whole situation, but she thought that if you just were a bit kinder to people, that they would be kinder to you. Lucia was too sweet for this world, is what she was. So the boys went away with their food, but this time Lucia was a bit happier. She was a bit more content. Giulia was a bit more content. She wasn't as upset as she was when they usually steal her food. And because she knew this time that she had a plan. The next day, Giulia was walking in the town market and she heard exactly what she wanted to hear. She heard the boys screaming. She heard Giovanna's mother crying over Giovanni, running to the priest, his father, being like, we need to pray for the boy. I think he is demon possessed or something. Giovanni was terribly ill. I mean, he was sweating like profusely. He was sick. He was pale. He had lost somehow all the weight he had the day before. He was sick. He looked sickly in one day. The same thing happened to the two other boys that had eaten the food that Giulia had prepared. And Giulia smiled and said, that would teach you to take from me. You see, Giovanni lived across town and his father preferred to stay in the church. So his mother was taking him across the market in tears, bereaved, and everyone was looking at her and saying, oh, she was just like, my boy's sick, I don't know what to do. And as they walked through the market, Giovanni's eyes caught Giulia's eyes, and she smiled a smirk. And in that moment, Giovanni did not know how or why, but he knew that this was Giulia, that she had done this, and that she was the reason for his suffering. But it did not cause anger in him, it caused fear. He was scared of Giulia in that moment. The boys lived though. Giovanni and both his friends were fine. They got ill. Giovanni was the sickest of them all, but he did not die. He purged everything out of his body and somehow he lived. He was never quite the same again. He didn't want to admit that a girl that was so much weaker than him, smaller than him, in his mind dumber than him, could have done this to him. So he never admitted it, but from that day on, Giovanni would see the girls up by the river and he would not approach them. He just left them alone. And Lucia, after a while of their picnic, said, the boys don't come anymore to bully us. We're having so much fun. I'm so happy. And Julie said, yeah, I think being nicer to them worked out for us pretty nicely. And Giulia felt powerful because now she had something that could help her make her life a bit easier. You see, now she knew that she could be strong, that she could be a fighter, that she could protect the people that she loved, like her friend Lucia and herself. And now she had a monster that she knew she could fight, that she could take on, but this time she was not trying to make them just ill. She wanted them to disappear forever. The monster that was her father and all the evil things that he did to Giulia's mother, Mother Maria. She knew that she had to take him down, that he was not going to grow some kind of consciousness. She knew that he wasn't going to decide to stop going to brothels to side from her mother. She knew that she had to fight this man head on and make sure that she saved her mother, because she knew her mother could not save herself. Giulia understood that all her remedies, every potion, every concoction, every mixture, every berry, everything, no matter what its effect, whether it healed an ailment, made someone feel better, ended an infection, cured someone, or made them very, very ill, that either way this was somehow healing, that it was medicine, that it was always helpful. You just had to know how to help. Now she knew her mother needed saving, and she decided that her father would have to go. She made this potion. It was a purplish color, like blood red. It was dark. It was her very first time creating something like this. You see, last time when she was dealing with Giovanni, she did not want to kill the boys. She just wanted them to stop hurting her and her friend. This time she needed her father to go away because she knew he would never stop, that he would keep on beating her mother, that he would never grow a consciousness. So she knew that she had to make him stop. She decided that night, after she had made her potion, she went to the forest, you see, and she mixed it all up. She didn't want to do it in front of her mother because her mother would become very suspicious. She knew her mother would never agree. She didn't even have to ask. Her mother's heart was too big to do such a thing, even if it meant saving her own life. Her mother could never. So in the forest, by her little section of the forest where she would help her animals heal and she would fix broken birds' wings, she had like an entire cute little apothecary station in the middle of the woods. It looked absolutely magical. She created this potion and put it in a vial, and it was getting late and she knew dinner was coming up, so she ran home, and her mother asked her to help set up for dinner that night. And she knew that her father was going to be home this night, but he is normally never home, you see. He's normally like having beers with his friends at the local tavern, or in a brothel, or he's on the streets, or he is fighting some drunkard. He is never home. But this day she knew he was going to be home because, well, this was the end of the month when her mother dealt with all the money, and her father loved to take it. He called it like his tithe that he deserved somehow, like he was God or the church or something like that. And even if he was, it was not his money to take, you know, it was not his to have, but he would be there so he could take some of the money before her mother would have to pay taxes. And now, as they sat around the table for dinner, well, before that, as they set up, Giulia went to her father's side of the table and poured in 4 droplets of this purple blood red potion, and her hand shook it while she poured this drink into her father's food. And her mother called her, which gave her a bit of a fright, but she just went to her mother and she said, "Call your father down, it's time to eat." This was a rare occasion, but her father wasn't drunk this night. He was like talking normally, like he was lucid or something, and he was never like this. And he was telling a story about his childhood, and in that moment he kind of felt like a normal father, like he felt like a person somehow in that moment. But she knew that she had to go through with this. But in that moment she hesitated. because she saw like humanity in his eyes, in his story. But then she reminded herself of all the times her mother went to work with a swollen eye that was shut, or the time he beat her so bad that he broke skin, or the time that he came home with a brothel worker. She remembered all the times he stole from them, all the times he left them hungry. That even though in this moment he may seem like a person, he may almost seem human, that he was a monster, and that she was a healer, and that she needed to heal. As they began to eat their food, Giulia nervously looked at her father. She glanced at him and looked away, panicked, eating her food extremely slowly. Her mother made small talk like, "Oh, so how was your day? What do you do?" Her father hates these questions because, well, he does nothing all day except be the worst human being that has ever lived. She talked about her day, about how she met an interesting traveler. You see, people travel in and out of the town all the time. It's a little village, but it's normally a good stop for travelers who are traveling pretty far distances. And she talked about a man who could do tricks, magic tricks, about how he guessed the correct card that she picked, about how he made a flower disappear, about how he was funny. Her father was not amused by this story. But then he started to cough. Giulia's father started to feel like a tightness around his throat. He started to cough. he couldn't breathe. He said, "Child, get me water. Get me water." And he couldn't breathe. His chest was getting heavier and heavier, and he collapsed. He just fell on the floor, and Giulia watched him. Giulia's mother ran to her asphyxiating father and cried and said, "Giulia, run, get help, do something." She was absolutely destroyed. As much as this man made her suffer, she loved him. She adored him. She thought he was everything. She was love, so how could she not love this man, no matter how monstrous he was? But Giulia just stood there, understanding that her work had been done, that there was nothing she could do to undo this. And she slowly walked out the house as her mother cried and screamed, "Go find help, go find help." But Giulia did not want to go find help. She wanted him to stop. She wanted him to not be anymore, And then she heard her mother release this wail that was coming from her stomach. Wasn't a normal cry. It was like a cry that came from the depths of one's soul. And in that moment, Giulia knew that her father was dead. And this is when she began to bang against her neighbors' doors, running up the flats, banging on doors, running in the streets, screaming, "Help, help, we need help. My father, he fell, we were eating and he started choking and please come help. The entire road lane on where they lived woke up, came out of their rooms, came out from their dinners, from them packing up from their day ending, and came to the house. And they saw him. They brought him out on the street by the door, and he was dead. He had no life in his body. And here comes the priest. You see, the priest is always called when a person is extremely ill or dies, for prayers, to pray over the body, to make sure that they give their life to the Lord so that they don't go to hell. That is just what they do in this Italian village. And he was already dead. The priest came up to Giulia's father's body and went down to it and said, "What happened?" Giulia's mother, distraught, said, I don't know. He was eating and then he stopped eating and then he just fell and now he's gone. Her father's eyes were bloodshot red. His mouth had like red foam in it almost, and he looked like he was in pain but dead at the same time. And the priest looked at Giulia's mother Maria and stood up and looked at the crowd that had been forming to find out what all the commotion was about and said, "Listen, this is the proof I was talking about. This is what I needed to say. Men don't just drop dead. Healthy men don't just drop dead." Her father wasn't healthy, but he was a drunk. But the priest alleges that her father was healthy. Healthy men don't just drop dead, and not like this. He was not ill. He was not sick. He was not showing symptoms. I mean, wasn't he just with you? He pointed to a man in the crowd. "Martin, the other day, weren't you just with him in the fields? We were just talking to this man. I saw him in the congregation on Sunday, and now he is dead. Men don't just drop dead like this." No, this man was murdered. The crowd gasped. This man was murdered in cold blood by this witch, and he pointed to Giulia's mother and she began to sob. She said, "I would never do this. I would never do this to my husband. He was my family. He is my family." The priest would not have it. I told you guys, I told you, women who behave the way this woman behaves are either prostitutes sent from hell or demons themselves, witches. You see, we remember this man. He was a good man, and then look, now he is dead. Now he is gone. The priest says, because of this witch, I say we arrest her. We send her to trial. The crowd is getting riled up. The crowd is getting very riled up. Some people in the crowd are saying, "No, Maria would never do that. Maria is a good woman, an innocent woman. She heals people." He says, "No woman does that." They arrest Giulia's mother. They take her, drag her away, as Giulia screams and cries for her mother, knowing that now her father is dead, and because of her mother is about to be put to trial for a crime that she did not even commit. Her mother is locked up in the town like square, like they have this central where a lot of like the city's like stuff happens, like events, and like people pay taxes there, and there's a jailhouse, and her mother's put in it. It's cold, it is made of concrete, it is damp, there are rats, and her mother's put in it, a cellar. And Giulia is allowed to visit her mother the next day, and she runs to her mother and cries and says, "Mama, what can we do? What?" Like Giulia is just so Giulia is incredibly like distraught. She doesn't know what to do, and she understands that this is her fault. She wasn't trying to get her mother arrested. She was trying to save her mother. Her mother is perfectly calm, as her mother always is, and she says, "You know what, my darling child, justice will prevail itself. They will take me to trial, and in trial they will see that I am innocent." And tears just roll down Maria's face and Giulia's face, because they know that she is already guilty in the eyes of these men. That there is nothing they can say, nothing that she can do to prove her own innocence, that in their eyes she will forever be a murderess. And that women who are charged with murder or witchcraft are burnt. That all of them are burnt. And Giulia looks at her mom and says, "No, Mama, we will, Mama, I have a confession. Forgive me, Mama. I'm so sorry. No, my child, this is not your fault. This is people who just choose to be violent, people who choose to hurt other people's fault. Please don't be worried, my darling child. We will get through this." She says, "No, Mama." She says, I wanted to help you because you help other people, and Papa is like an illness." Her face drops. Giulia's mom's face just drops. "And I wanted to heal you of him. So shh." Maria already knew what Giulia was about to say. Never repeat those words ever again. I did this crime. I did this. No, Mama, I will tell them what I have done. I will tell them, and they will. No. Either way, I am already dead. And perhaps they will burn you too, child. No. You do not say a word. Look at me in the eyes, child. You will not say a single word. You were braver than I could ever be. You protected me, though I could not protect myself, though I could not protect you. You tried to save me, child. Now I will save you. Okay? You will go up. You will go up the hill. And you will go to Madame Linda's house. You will go and you will stay with her. And Lucia, you will stay with her and Lucia until tomorrow, when you can come and see me again, and it will be fine. Okay? They will help you, they will take you, and they will look after you. Okay, my child? Okay? Bye-bye. The guard that's keeping Giulia's mom in her cellar says, Time. You need to leave. And Giulia leaves and goes up this hill to go to Lucia's house, and for the first time the walk is lonely and painful. And she gets to the door of the villa, and a maid opens the door, and Lucia sees Giulia and runs to her and says, Giulia, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. They're lies. I know they are lying. I know your mother would never do such a thing. And Giulia just breaks down in tears in Lucia's arms and says, they will burn my mother, and I will have no one. I will be all alone. And Lucia says, you are never alone. As long as you have me, you will never be alone. Lucia's mom, Madame Linda, walks in and looks at Giulia on the floor, crying, devastated. She already knows what happens. The whole village knows that tomorrow is Maria's trial to try to find her innocent. But people are rarely, if ever, found innocent for such crimes. She's being charged with witchcraft and murder. And Lucia's mom knows that people don't get off on these crimes, that people are burnt for these crimes. So she picks up Lucia and Giulia and tugs them off the floor and puts them in Lucia's room and says, you will stay here, my child. You will stay here. We will look after you. You will be one of my daughters. You are not alone. Your mother saved my child. She saved my Marco, so I will save her child. I will help you, Giulia. And the next day, at court, Giulia's mom is found guilty of witchcraft and murder. And that night, she's in her cellar, and the whole town is gathered. The whole village is gathered around this pyre of wood set in a triangular cone form, like these big large pieces of wood with hay circling it, with hay and wood and sticks. And Giulia is called to come see her mother, and she cries in her mother's arms because now she must say goodbye to the woman that she tried to save. Giulia is distraught and does not know how to save her mother out of this one. She wishes that she never had that stupid idea to help her mother, to try to save her mother. And now she has put her mother in an even worse position than she was before. Giulia's mom, Maria, looks Giulia in the eyes and says, "My child, remember to be kind. Remember to help those who cannot help themselves. Remember that I love you. But above all, do not feel guilty for this. I'm the one who failed you. I should have done what you did to that man. And remember, you did not kill a man, you killed a monster. He was a monster. Giulia, thank you, my daughter. Thank you. Because even if it was only for a little bit, I was free from him." And they hugged and they embraced. And eventually, she's taken away. Her mother is taken away as the townspeople look at her being walked through the streets to this pyre of wood, and she is tied to it. And the priest says that this is the day of justice, that this is the day of reckoning, that this witch will burn. And Giulia tries to run to the crowd, but she's held back by Madame Linda in her arms and says, "No, child, no, you cannot go." And she holds Giulia in her arms as Giulia sobs, and Giulia watches as the priest rants slanderous things at her mother that is untrue, and these townspeople that she helped, that she saved, that she made their children better, they just watch as Giulia's mother is set alight and screams. The scream was so visceral in your ear. It was like shards being ran through your eardrums. It was painful to hear this scream, and Giulia heard her mother dying. Giulia orphaned herself, and she does not understand how she went from having a whole family to having no one. Giulia is besides herself in pain. Giulia is distraught. Giulia does not know what to do. And the townspeople, they begin to disperse and go away. The screaming has stopped, and Giulia just falls to her knees in front of the burning pyre, and she watches a single piece of fabric float towards her and land right in front of her. It is a piece of her mother's dress, and Giulia just sits there on the ground. She looks at Linda, Madame Linda, Lucia's mom, and she says, "I'm gonna stay here with my mother for a little bit." Madam Linda asks her, would you like me to stay? No, it's fine. I just want to be here with my mama one last time. She sits in front of the pyre as it burns and burns, and she watches her mother's frame turn smaller and smaller until it begins to fall apart, until the wood begins to concave in, and she kneels in front of the pyre and just watches it burn for hours, until there is no more fire, until there is just dust on the floor. And Giulia would tell you that burning flesh smells like her mother dying, and she realizes that the person who loved her most in this whole world is now dead. Giulia opens up a can that she had and takes a big clump of ash and puts it inside this container. She takes a piece of cloth and puts it in her pocket. She walks up the hill to the grand villa where she now stays with Lucia and Madam Linda, who have taken her in as one of their own. She is lonely, but she is not alone. Her friend's mother have taken her in, but she does not know she'll ever be able to forgive herself for what had happened. Now she's in her room, in Lucia's room. They sleep together every day. She cannot fathom sleeping alone anymore. She has these terrible nightmares, and in the nightmares it's her mother set on fire, running through the streets asking for help, and Lucia is looking for water to help her mother, and she can never find her mother in time. After she finds the water, her mother has already turned to dust. Giulia lives with her friend Lucia, and her friend tries to make her feel better, but understands there's not much that can be done, and she tries to have picnics with her and buys more books about plants and herbs and remedies. But Giulia does not read anymore. She does not go outside into the forest to help her animals. Giulia just sits in pain, bereaved, suffering. One day she's in the vineyard looking up at the clouds, and her thought hits her head as if this is the answer she's been waiting for, as if she was praying and now her prayers have been answered. A thought hits her like a boulder, and she thinks to herself that this happened because of men who choose to make innocent women suffer, that they had no proof that her mother had done this, that her mother was guilty in the eyes of the priest, in the eyes of these men, long before she had actually committed any crimes. Giulia vowed to herself that she would make men like this pay for making the lives of good women hard. That she would find a way to make sure that women did not suffer like this, that women would not have to be in pain like this, that boys like Giovanni turned into men like his father, who burned women at stakes for crimes they did not commit. You see, Giulia knew that she had to grow, that she had to get justice, vengeance for her mother, that this would not be the end of her story, that this was just the beginning. Later in the day, Giulia and Lucia were talking, and Lucia, informed Giulia that she was to be married off, that even though she was only 14, that her father felt like it was the right time, that she would be married off to a good family, a rich family, to a man that was 20 years Lucia senior. And Giulia asked Lucia if she did not protest this, if she did not say no to this awful arrangement. And Lucia said that it is what she must do, that she always knew that this would be her job in the future, that she had to be someone's wife one day and make noble children of their own. Lucia looked sad in her eyes, she had sadness behind them, but she almost felt like this was her purpose in this life. And she says, would you help me plan? My mother is awfully excited. We will have a big wedding. We will fill the entire town. Oh, they'll be so happy. The whole town will be so happy. And perhaps it's something we can do together, to get your mind off things. You could find the prettiest flowers for me that don't die. You always know the best flowers. And yeah. So in my next video, there will be a next video where I will be continuing Giulia's story about what she does after all of these events in her life. If you've watched this far, I would like you to subscribe, to leave a comment of how you feel about the story, how you feel about Giulia, who's your favorite character, who's your least favorite character. Yeah, I'm so happy you found my channel. Don't forget to subscribe.